So now we are going to deploy Istio in the different workload clusters. Be aware that if Istio is already running, we can just discover it. If you want, you can also deploy Istio manually, but we have this capability of automating the lifecycle of Istio. That's what we are going to do now. We can also let Gloo Mesh deploying the services and everything, but in this case we try to do everything like in a production ready way, and most of the time people deploy Istio in clusters that are running in the cloud, and they use like this service type load balancer for the gateways, and that creates automatically a host name and so on, and you want to be able to reuse this load balancer that is created in the cloud for multiple different versions of Istio. So if I start with 116 and I want to go to 117, I don't want to create a new load balancer when I upgrade. So that's why it's a best practice to create these services up front and to put all the annotation that you need based on your service provider. And then we'll see just later that when we are going to deploy Istio, we will tell Gloo Mesh that we want to use these custom services that we've created manually. So we create this namespace called Istio Gateways, where we're going to deploy the Istio ingress gateways for the north-south traffic and for the cross-cluster communication. Again, you could create everything in one namespace in the Istio system namespace, but we really try to follow all the best practices. So we create one service for the ingress gateway for the north-south traffic that is going to listen on port 443 and 80, and we do that also another gateway, another service for the gateway for the cross-cluster communication that is using different ports. So we do that for cluster 1 and we do that for cluster 2. So basically we create two services on each cluster. In our case we use MetaLB, but as I say, in the cloud that will generate the creation of cloud load balancers. So if I go to and look at my services here, I can see my ingress gateway service that has this external IP and my east-west gateway service that has this other IP. Now we can use this Istio Lifecycle Manager object to tell Gloo Mesh what version of Istio we want to install in which cluster. We can have like one lifecycle manager where we define multiple clusters, or which is good if you want to upgrade everything kind of the same pace, or you can have one object per cluster. It's really up to you. Here I won't go through all the details that we have there. There are a lot of settings that we have added just because we want to show in some other videos how to integrate virtual machines in the mesh or things like that. So that's why we have a little bit some extra options there. But you can see also that we use this hub and tag, which says that we want to use like we don't want to use the default Istio Docker images, but instead we want to use the one that we produce at Solo. So we don't do a fork of Istio, we just create images for each version of Istio where we are adding extra envoy filters, especially for providing some extra gateway capabilities. But be aware we also have like a FIPS version of it or a distroless version of it, or we can have even solo FIPS distroless version of these images. So here we just say we want to deploy in cluster 1, we want to deploy Istio 1.16.4 using the solo images. And when we do this, what's going to happen is the management plane is going to automate the deployment of the Istio operator in the first cluster. So you see here GM IOP 116, so this is the Istio operator. it's also going to create the IstioOperator object that correspond to what we have just described here, right? So that's very similar to what you have set in the Istio Lifecycle Manager object. And then we can see that the operator itself is going to deploy IstioD, and we'll show later in another video how we can do a proper upgrade, like a canary upgrade without disruption. But right now we just deployed Istio in cluster 1, and we will deploy the 2 gateways. So we use for that another object called Gateway Lifecycle Manager, where we say we want to use this 116 revision that have just been created before. And you see we say we want to use a custom service, right? We don't want to have the service created by the operator, but instead we want to use the one we have defined earlier. Again, we use like a different gateway lifecycle manager object for the ingress of cluster 1 and the east-west of cluster 1, but it's really up to you. You could have like one gateway lifecycle for both of them, right? It's really up to the way you like to manage things. So here we create these objects and the operator is already there, right? So what's happening is we are creating these new IstioOperator objects, and the operator is going to deploy now the gateways. So we can see already the ingress gateway is deployed, and then the east-west gateway is now deployed as well. So we do exactly the same for cluster 2. So we deploy like IstioD and the ingress gateway and the east-west gateway. Everything is declarative. We don't need to worry about the order, right? You can really create the gateway lifecycle manager before or whatever. Everything is going to be reconciled at the end. So I just like submit everything at once, and very quickly we start to see the operator coming and Istio coming and so on, and we'll see also in the UI the things being discovered, right? So here we can see that I have this Istio 116.4 with the soul images that is discovered, and now the same for the second cluster. So that means that everything is ready. We also define some environment variables we are going to use later when we want to access the ingress gateway, when we want to do different tests, and I'm going to show you that in a minute here. So all these environment variables basically they correspond to these services here, right? So for example, the endpoint HTTPS gateway cluster 1 is going to be this IP address, this external IP address of the ingress gateway, and the port 443.